Alright everyone, in this video we are going to be looking at quadratic equations. That is, we are going to be solving quadratic equations. Now the general form of a quadratic equation is given as ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. Don't forget, this is an equation different from expressions, and that's the reason it is having the equal to sign. So ax squared plus bx plus c is the general form of a quadratic equation. And of course, we've been able to establish where that a is not equal to 0. A must not be equal to 0. A must not be equal to 0. And at the same time, a is the coefficient of x squared. A is the coefficient of x squared. A is the coefficient of x squared. That is the number aligning with x squared is the coefficient of x squared, which is a. Then b is the coefficient of x. Coefficient of x. And c remains the constant. C is the constant term. The constant term. Constant term. So a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant term. So a typical example of a quadratic equation is when we have 3x squared plus 2x plus 5 equal to 0. So in this case, a is 3 because 3 is the coefficient of x squared. B is 2 because 2 is the coefficient of x, while 5 is the constant, which is c. So this is a format through which a quadratic equation looks like. Of course, this is not the only way a quadratic equation can be. Now, in situation where b is 0, now in situation where b is 0, now where b becomes 0, when b equal to 0, so this general form of quadratic equation becomes ax squared then we have plus c. That's what it becomes. So it means ax squared plus bx plus c, which is equal to 0, which is the general form of a quadratic equation. It becomes ax squared plus c equal to 0. That is, b is already 0, and b multiplying x will still give us 0. So the quadratic equation is reduced to ax squared plus c. So of course, if you see question like this, a quadratic equation question like this, you can also solve it. Also, there are times when c becomes 0. When c equal to 0, it means the quadratic equation, which is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0, becomes, so it becomes, in this case our c is equal to 0, it becomes ax squared then plus bx, of course plus 0, but I don't need to write it, equal to 0. So it is reduced to ax squared plus bx equal to 0. This is another format of quadratic equation that you can see. So we are going to be looking at different means through which we can solve any format of quadratic equation given to us. And of course, we have 4 methods for solving quadratic equation. But out of these 4 methods, 3 of them are algebraic methods for solving quadratic equation, which are the 3 methods we are going to be looking at. So the 3 methods we're going to be looking at, the first one is called the factorization method, for factorization. The second method is called completing the square method. Completing the square method. Completing the square. While the third method is called the quadratic formula method, or we say formula method. So we are going to be using 3 methods. So we are going to be bringing the method one after the other. So the first method we're going to be looking at here is the factorization method. So factorization method. Now, the first example here using factorization method. Okay, let me write it. Using factorization method now. So the first example here says we should solve for x. So solve for x. Solve for x in this equation in ax squared plus bx, ax squared plus bx equal to 0. As you can see, this equation c is equal to 0 here. So it means it has been reduced to ax squared plus bx equal to 0. So how do we use factorization to get our answer? When you are faced with situation like this, when you are faced with a question that looks like this, all you just need to do is solution. So all we need to do is we write it out, which is ax squared plus bx plus is equal to 0 rather. So all we just need to do is we factorize. X is common, so we have x into bracket x in ax squared is ax, then plus x in bx is what is b, everything equal to 0. So it means we have factorized this into two factors multiplying themselves. And what are the two factors multiplying themselves? We have x and ax plus b multiplying themselves. So all we just need to do is we now say either, so the first factor, which is x, either x equal to 0, or we pick the second factor, which is ax plus b, or ax plus b equal to 0. So we already know that x is equal to 0 already. So x equal to 0, or then we begin to solve this. Ax equal to minus b when b comes to the other side. So that means x is equal to 0, or x rather, or x equal to minus b over a. That's when we divide both sides by a. So x equal to 0, or x equal to minus b over a. So these are the solutions to the quadratic equation that we have been asked to solve. So this is a binomial quadratic equation because it's having two terms. So but the general form of a quadratic equation is supposed to be having three terms. It's supposed to be a trinomial. But when b or c equal to 0, so it reduces to a binomial quadratic equation. So, and that's the first example that I have here for us. Now let's look into the second example that I have. So here we are being asked to solve the equation. So example 2, or example, solve the equation 10x squared plus 10x squared plus 15x equal to 0. This is looking like the last example, but the difference is these ones are having numbers, 10x squared plus 15x. So the first thing we need to do is we also factorize. 5x is common, so we have 5x into bracket 5x in 10x squared is going to be giving us 2x, then plus 5x in 15x is going to be giving us 3, because 5 in 15 is 3, x in x is 1. So we are factorized into two factors multiplying themselves equal to 0. Then we pick one, which is the one outside, either 5x equal to 0, or we pick the second factor, which is 2x plus 3, or 2x plus 3 equal to 0. And of course 5x which is equal to 0 implies that x is going to be equal to 0. So that is, we can say x equal to 0 over 5, which is still going to give us 0. Or we say 2x equal to minus 3. So either x equal to 0 now, or we say x equal to, dividing both sides by 2, minus 3 over 2. So these are the solutions to the quadratic equation that we are being asked to do. Now let's move further into solving other ones. So here we are being asked to solve x raised to the power of 2 equal to 10x. So we have x squared equal to 10x. Of course, when you have this, all we need to do is we need to rearrange. So in case you are given something like this, a quadratic equation that looks like this, you have to rearrange. And how do we rearrange? We have x raised to the power of 2 minus 10x, everything equal to 0. Then we factorize. X is common, so we have x into bracket x minus 10, of course, equal to 0. Then we can say either x equal to 0, so either x equal to 0, or we bring the one in a bracket, x minus 10 equal to 0. That means either x equal to 0, or we say x equal to 10. So these are the solutions to the quadratic equation. And of course, what if you are given in another format, which is like this? So let me write it here. What if you are given like this? What if the question is x plus 3, x plus 6, that is, you have a bracket, x plus 3, then x plus 6 equal to 0, and you are being asked to solve this. If you want to solve this, you don't need to stress yourself, because this has been factorized already. Is in a factorization manner already. So it's just a two factors multiplying themselves already. So all you just need to do is just say either the first factor, which is x plus 3 equal to 0, or you pick the second factor, which is x plus 6 equal to what? 0. So from there you say x is equal to minus 3, or x equal to minus 6. So you just go straight to the point without you stressing yourself. Now let's look into another format of questions like this using binomial quadratic equation. Of course, we have solved the equations. The first one is x squared minus 9 equal to 0. So you can easily do this by saying solution. So we have the first one, which is x squared minus 9 equal to 0. You can see this is having two terms, but instead it is different from the examples that we have here, because the both terms are having x, while this is just having x squared and having a constant. So in this case, b is equal to 0. So we have, it's going to become x squared equal to, when we bring 9 to the other side, it becomes 9. So you take the square root of both sides. So that means taking the square root of both sides. So we have x equal to plus or minus the square root of 9. And x equal to plus or minus 3. So you can say either x equal to 3 or x equal to minus 3. Another way you can solve this is using difference of two squares. You already know how that x, so this is the answer. So using difference of two squares format, so we know that x squared minus 9 now equal to 0, which can be written as x squared minus 3 squared equal to 0. And of course, you know that x squared minus 3 squared is going to be written as x plus 3 and x minus 3 equal to 0. As you can see now, you can now say either x plus 3 equal to 0, or x minus 3 equal to 0. That means x equal to 3 minus 3 rather. X equal to minus 3, or you say x equal to 3. You can see this is another way you can solve this. So using the difference of two squared method. Now let's quickly solve the second question. So we have B. We have 2y squared minus 128 equal to 0. Of course, we can also apply the same procedure which we have applied in the first one. So we have 2y squared equal to 128 when you bring 128 to the other side. So dividing both sides by 2, so we have 2y squared. Okay, let me write it properly. So we have 2y squared divided by 2 equal to 128 divided by 2. Of course, 2 is going to be dividing 2 here. So we have y squared equal to 128 divided by 2 is going to give us 64. Then we take the square root of both sides. So we have y equal to plus or minus the square root of 64. Therefore, y equal to plus 8 plus or minus 8. So that is y equal to 8 or y equal to minus 8. And of course, we can use the difference between two squared. Difference of two squared also, which is also going to give us the same thing. And that's just how we go about it. Our time is fast spent. I don't want this video to be longer than it is. So do well to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Anticipate for the next video, because in our next video, we're going to be looking at how to solve trinomial quadratic equations. Because all the examples we have done here, they are all binomial quadratic equations. So anticipate for the next video. You are great.